What happens when the person you love starts to consume your biggest dreams? I used to believe my ambitions were my own, but then they became his obsession. Join me as I recount the harrowing journey of realizing my entire future was being held captive and the impossible fight to get it back. It all began with a spark, a beautiful alignment of our individual dreams. We were two ambitious souls, ready to conquer the world together. I was pursuing a career in journalism while he was climbing the corporate ladder. Our goals seemed to complement each other perfectly, creating a vision of a power couple destined for greatness. In those early days, we'd spend hours talking about our future, mapping out our plans on whiteboards and in shared journals. His enthusiasm for my aspirations was intoxicating. He'd listen intently as I spoke about my desire to become an investigative reporter, offering suggestions and connections that seemed invaluable at the time. Looking back, I can see the subtle shifts that I so easily dismissed. The way he'd gently steer our conversations about my career, always circling back to how it could benefit us. At first it felt like teamwork, like we were building something extraordinary together. But slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamic began to change. My first big break came when I landed a coveted internship at a prestigious news network. I was ecstatic, ready to dive headfirst into the world of journalism. But his reaction wasn't quite what I expected. Instead of pure joy, there was a calculated gleam in his eye. "This is perfect for us," he said, emphasizing the us in a way that made me pause. It was the first time I felt a twinge of unease, but I brushed it aside, chalking it up to nerves. As I began to make a name for myself, his guidance became more insistent. What started as helpful advice turned into demands disguised as concern. He'd critique my article choices, suggesting I focus on stories that aligned more with his business interests. "Think about our future," he'd say, his voice a mixture of love and authority that left me feeling confused and guilty. Gradually, my world began to shrink. Friends who had once been a source of support and inspiration were now viewed as distractions. Family gatherings were cut short, always with a reasonable excuse about deadlines or networking events. "We need to prioritize our goals," he'd remind me, and I'd nod, believing that this isolation was the price of success. It wasn't until a late night at the office, as I stared at a half-finished article that felt nothing like my own work, that the realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't my dream anymore. It had become a warped version of his vision, with me as nothing more than a pawn in his grand plan. The thought left me breathless, terrified, and utterly alone. That night, as I lay awake beside him, I made a decision that would change everything. I had to leave. The thought was simultaneously liberating and paralyzing. How could I walk away from the person I loved, the future we had planned, the life we had built? But as I looked at his sleeping form, I knew with certainty that staying would mean losing myself entirely. The next few weeks were a blur of secret preparations and heart-wrenching doubts. I reached out to an old friend, someone I had regrettably distanced myself from, and found a lifeline. With trembling hands, I packed a small bag, wrote a note I knew could never fully explain, and slipped out of our shared apartment in the early hours of the morning. Finding a new place to live was just the beginning. The real challenge was rediscovering who I was without him, without the constant pressure of our dreams. I sat in my tiny studio apartment, surrounded by boxes and uncertainty, and asked myself a question that should have been simple but felt impossibly complex. What did I want? The process of healing and rediscovery was painful, often leaving me feeling raw and exposed. There were days when the temptation to return to the familiar, even if it meant losing myself, was almost overwhelming. But with each small decision I made for myself, each article I wrote that truly reflected my passions, I felt a little stronger. I began to confront the emotional scars left by years of subtle manipulation. Therapy became a lifeline, helping me untangle the web of guilt, love, and ambition that had trapped me for so long. Slowly, I learned to trust my own instincts again, to believe in the value of my own dreams without needing someone else's validation. As I rebuilt my life and career, I became acutely aware of the red flags I had missed or ignored. The way he had isolated me from my support system, how my successes were always framed in terms of us rather than celebrated as my own achievements. I promised myself that I would never again let someone else's ambitions overshadow my own. Sharing my story wasn't easy. There was shame in admitting how much of myself I had given up, how long it had taken me to see the truth. But as I began to open up, first to close friends, and then through my writing, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. My vulnerability became a source of power, connecting me with others who had faced similar struggles. Today, as I look towards the future, I see a path that is uniquely mine. My dreams, now truly my own, are bigger and brighter than I ever imagined. I've rediscovered my passion for investigative journalism, tackling stories that matter to me, that can make a difference in the world. And while the journey hasn't been easy, I know that every step has been worth it. To those who might see themselves in my story, know that it's never too late to reclaim your dreams. Your ambitions are yours alone, precious and worthy of protection. Trust your instincts, cherish your support system, and never be afraid to stand up for your own vision of the future. The road to self-discovery may be challenging, but the freedom to pursue your own path is invaluable. As I close this chapter of my life, I'm filled with a sense of hope and excitement for what lies ahead. My dreams are no longer captives, held hostage by someone else's obsession. They're free, soaring higher than ever before, limited only by my own imagination and determination. And that, I've learned, is the most beautiful thing of all.